Good evening, y'all, and welcome to the last session of the 2024 League of Women Voters of Wisconsin's issue briefing. My name is Cole Torres, and I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager for the State League. My pronouns are she, her. Today, we continue our theme of justice for all in Wisconsin. This evening, we will focus on justice for the LGBTQIA+ community. We will hear from Fair Wisconsin's Abigail Swetz, and I hope I said that correctly, Executive Director, and Sean O'Brien, Policy and Advocacy Director, about anti-LGBTQIA+ legislation in Wisconsin and our country at large. This session will focus on the impacts of this legislation on minors and schools and what it means for LGBTQIA+ future generations. Executive Director Abigail Swetz comes to Fair Wisconsin with an extensive history of policy, communications, public education, and advocacy experience, driven by a deep passion for LGBTQ+ rights and queer liberation. She is an award-winning teacher, having been named the 2017 Educator of the Year by GSAFE, and has been recognized for her writing and performance at theater festivals. A former teacher and GSA advisor, Abigail is deeply committed to making Wisconsin a safe and welcoming place. She also strives to ensure that LGBTQ+ rights are protected and our community is celebrated for generations to come. Director Sean O'Brien joined Fair Wisconsin in October of 2020 as the GOTV coordinator and later transitioned into the role of advocacy and organizing strategist. Sean first became active in Wisconsin politics during 2011 Act 10 uprising. Sean was active on his college campus as the founding voice for the Queer Student Center, the president of Edgewood Safe, the vice president of the Edgewood College Democrats, and vice president of the Edgewood College Pre-Law Society. Following Abigail and Sean is a panel discussion featuring Dr. Britt Allen and Dr. Ronnie Hayon about barriers to providing essential care for those in the LGBTQIA+ community. In the interest of safety, the panel discussion will not be recorded or available for future viewing. Feel free to pose your questions in the chat throughout the session. Abigail, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. And Sean, you can go ahead and share your screen. Fun fact, when Sean says that he was a part of his political activism in Act 10, he's talking about when he was a student and I was a teacher, because he was a student of mine. We go way back. So today we're going to talk about the LGBTQ+ legislative landscape across the country and then also within our state, because you'll see as we talk through quite a few of the things we're seeing across the country have also already been seen in Wisconsin. They just haven't gotten very far. Thanks a lot to some incredible activism in our state and some very supportive elected officials who are able to help us stop some really bad stuff from happening. We look forward to the day that we're able to do some proactive work. But you'll see today that most of the things we're talking about is making sure that we're defending our rights as opposed to making sure that we're able to expand them. We look forward to that someday being different. So Sean, you want to do the first slide, which is, I believe, a picture of me, just to be awkward. Just a tiny little bit more about me. I come to this space most recently from the Department of Public Instruction, where I was the communications director there. This is a continuation of my work here at Fair Wisconsin for LGBTQ+ youth, and now expanding it to really the entire community. And I'm really excited to be here. I've been here all of 5 months. And so that is why it is so important that this is a team effort in this presentation, because it's really a team effort at Fair Wisconsin always. We're a scrappy team of 3. So when you're about to see some of the work we do, please keep in mind there are only 3 of us, and yet we're able to create a pretty strong impact, again, thanks to so many wonderful partnerships and community, hopefully involving some of you. Sean, you want to introduce yourself a little bit more on your next slide with your awesome pictures of Governor Evers eating ice cream?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Sean O'Brien, he, him, and I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director at Fair Wisconsin. I have been active in Wisconsin politics since I was in 7th grade, and then in 8th grade when Abby was my teacher. So it's a very small world now that I get to work alongside of Abby and not just as a student. So I got involved very heavily in politics when I entered college, and then I first interned with State Representative Chris Taylor, and then I worked on Governor Evers' 2018 campaign. From before he launched through inauguration. We had a lot of fun on the trail, and I learned how much he loves ice cream, which is a very Wisconsin thing for our governor. Tony has been such a staunch ally for our community, and it was an honor to work for him, and it's been an honor to work alongside him and his administration these past 4 years. So I joined Fair Wisconsin in 2020. To lead our electoral efforts. And since then, my portfolio has fluctuated, being that we are only 3 staff. So that's a little bit about me. And I think we can dive straight in. Is that right, Abby?
Sounds great, Sean. So I don't know if everyone knows this on this call, but Wisconsin is actually considered the original gay rights state because our non-discrimination statute in Wisconsin includes sexual orientation and dates back to 1982 when it was signed into law by a Republican governor. And I think it's a really important moment in history for us to realize because we were really on the cutting edge in that moment. And now, because our state statute does not include gender identity in its non-discrimination statute, we are very behind. Because our non-discrimination law is so old. And so we are really looking forward to someday being able to really update that. And it's one of the reasons why it's so important that we are working so hard to fight back against some of the things you're going to see today, because we do not have those protections yet in our state statute. The other thing I want to make sure that we are very clear on is that at the end, you're going to see our slide with our contact information. Again, you just saw it before. We are always open to future collaboration and ideas and wanting to partner. And so as we go through today and we talk about some of the trends we're seeing nationally and specifically in our state, please think through, is this something you want to be involved in? And is this something you want to reach out to Fair Wisconsin to collaborate on? Because the more the merrier when it comes to making sure that the LGBTQ plus community is protected and celebrated. Sean, you want to keep going?
Yeah.
So this says 2023, but guess what? 2024 also broke records when it came to anti-LGBTQ plus bills in state legislatures across the country, and Wisconsin was one of them. We are seeing quite a varied attack on our community, coming at us from quite a few different angles. You did hear mentioned youth and schools and healthcare, and there is even more than that, right? And so we are going to look a little bit more deeply into some of those bills that we're seeing across the country. Sean, keep going. So in 2023, there were over 625 anti-LGBTQ plus bills. In 2024, I believe there were even more. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. Specifically, you'll see on this slide, and you'll also see as we keep going throughout the trends, and specifically in Wisconsin, that most of the bills are specifically anti-trans. Any bill that is anti-trans is also impacting our entire community, because trans people are within our community, of course, but it's also a really good example of a time when a bill targets a very marginalized community, it has a ripple effect of really having a negative impact on the entire community. I think of it a lot in terms of educational equity as someone who used to be a teacher. When you make sure that you are meeting the needs of the person who is most marginalized in your class, you will automatically be also meeting the needs of everyone else. The flip is also reversed. So when you are really targeting someone for an identity that is marginalized, you are also hurting everyone else. And so you'll see quite a few of these, actually, vast majority of the bills that we're talking about target the trans community and often trans youth. And it is something that we are very, very aware of when we go in and speak to groups, because you'll also, I think it's also important to name that I am not trans, but I am a member of the LGBTQ plus community. I think it's really important that we always center trans voices when we're speaking about trans identity and the issues and bills that impact them. And I also think it's really important that we don't ask trans community members to always be defending their own existence. And so it's one of the reasons why we try and be such a robust organization when it comes to standing up for our trans family members in our community, and also why when we go through and create strategies legislatively, that we make sure to center trans voices, but not always demand that they are at the front of everything, because that is already such a marginalized identity, in addition to being attacked by these bills. Keep going, Sean, because we're about to drill into all of these different topics. So one of the things that we see across the country, and also did come up here in Wisconsin, is bans against trans athletes participating in sports that match their gender identity. This is a topic that is very, very often a sort of first step towards other bills being introduced that are also anti-trans. Sean, I know the trans athlete ban that was put forward in Wisconsin predated my time at Fair Wisconsin. And I actually had a lot to do with the work that we did at DPI to try and make sure that it was stopped. But since that's my understanding, I should probably turn it over to Sean for a second to speak a little bit more about it in terms of Fair Wisconsin's work and not Department of Public Instruction's work. Sean, take it away.
Yeah. So before we dive into this issue, I actually want to take a step back and address a major elephant in the room, which is the past election. I'm assuming most people got bombarded by ads, and a lot of the ads surrounded pretty much two issues that were anti-trans. One, transgender healthcare, and two, trans athletes playing sports. So recently, within the past couple of days, the Human Rights Campaign has put out a report that shows that 64% of Americans saw these ads. Even in non-swing states, they were using these as a wedge issue to try to turn out votes. This very same report shows that only 4% of Americans that identified trans issues as the reason why they went to the polls and voted for Trump or against Harris. So that is a very large and very staggering fact, especially based on the amount of attacks and the amount of money and the amount of vitriol that was put into this. Trans issues were not a motivating factor in this election, even though they were attempted to be. And politicians for years, since 2020, have been trying to make trans issues a wedge and attack the community as a way to distract from larger societal issues. So yeah, in 2021, we saw the first anti-trans athlete bill that was introduced in Wisconsin. And we technically get 4 because we have a Senate version and an Assembly version, and then we had a K-12 version and a college version. The bills didn't really change between the 2021-2022 legislative session and the 2023-2024 legislative session. At the time, Wisconsin had never seen one of those bills, and it was a copycat bill from Arkansas that was introduced. And when the legislators were talking about it, they actually admitted it and at one point stumbled over their own words and said Arkansas instead of Wisconsin. So we know that this is not an issue that voters in Wisconsin or people in Wisconsin are concerned about, and it wasn't a bill that was brought forward by constituents. It was a bill that was brought forward by out-of-state actors. Abigail, I don't know if you have more to add.
Thanks, Sean. No, I think we can keep going because I'm sure we'll have really great questions that come up as we go. And I want to make sure we touch on all our issues so we're able to answer them effectively. So keep going to the next slide.
Also to give some grounding.
Oh, thank you. I forgot about this slide. Please do.
So to give some grounding, currently there are 26 states in the country that have a bill on the books that prevent trans athletes from playing in sports consistent with their gender identity. Wisconsin is one of the 24 states that do not ban trans athletes. And currently, of those 26 states, that makes up about 37.5% of the population of trans individuals live in a state with a ban on the books. So in 2021, Fair Wisconsin pulled together a coalition of our allies to come together and fight against these horrific bills. And we were incredibly successful. We beat back every single one of the bills in every single legislative session. But we made this ad that we put out there with a coalition of folks. And so we just wanted to take a moment to show it to y'all.
I learned that practice pays off.
On the value of hard work.
I became a part of something bigger than myself.
I wasn't great in school, but baseball and eventually softball motivated me to really work hard.
I never played college ball. I never went pro. But through mushing, I got to be part of something.
I learned how to win and how to lose and how to keep going either way.
I grew stronger.
I grew more confident.
I met some of my best friends.
I had fun.
I treasured those memories.
I hope all kids get the chance that I got.
I hope every kid in Wisconsin can be part of a team.
Trans inclusion is important to me. I coach kids in soccer that are gender fluid and non-binary. My kids are on their team, and those are just their teammates to them.
Let kids play, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, deja a niños que jueguen.
Let kids play, Wisconsin.
Kids play Wisconsin.
Kids play Wisconsin.
Let kids play, Wisconsin.
Just want to play with my friends. Bye.
So we released that video in 2021 with the coalition, the LGBTQ Policy and Advocacy Coalition, which is still going, and we're about to reactivate it for this legislative session. And we found that it was incredibly successful. And this video galvanized folks across Wisconsin to come down to the Capitol and testify. And we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of folks coming to testify. And we submitted almost 10,000 pages of written testimony on this one bill alone in the 2021-2022 legislative session. If y'all have a moment, we'll make sure that this slide deck gets out to all of you. If you have a moment, I would highly recommend watching Representative Ryan Clancy's testimony on behalf of trans youth in Wisconsin. He is a fantastic role model and one of the co-chairs of the Transparent and Non-Binary Advocacy Caucus in the state legislature, who's doing a lot of incredible work. Abby, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
You covered it. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah.
We are going to be digging in quite a bit in our panel about the incredible need for gender affirming care in our state for both youth and adults. But the reason we'll be talking about it is on a panel at the end of this is that this is very, very, very much the focus of so much of the animosity towards our trans community is about the attempt to take away medically accurate, evidence-based healthcare from people who really, really need it. And there is a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation about what gender affirming care truly is. And that's why we wanted to make sure we have the panel at the end of this presentation to really dig into that with medical practitioners about what gender affirming care really is. But when it comes to the bans, this, in addition to the anti-trans athletes ban, we are seeing this across the country, most specifically about bans against care for youth, but there are also rumblings of bans against care for adults as well. We are seeing it in other states, in some that have already passed youth bans, and this did also come up in the most recent legislative session here in Wisconsin as well. Sean, could you speak to Fair Wisconsin's involvement there for a second?
Yeah. So again, this bill came up again in 2020 in the 2021 legislative session. And it was slightly different than the bill that we saw in the most recent legislative session. The first bill that we saw, which was SB 915, not only would have prohibited youth from accessing gender affirming care, but it would have prohibited insurance companies for requiring care, and it would have prevented insurance companies for paying out for youth underneath of the ages of 18 who were covered by that insurance. So that provision was stripped from the 2023 bill. And so the bill that was introduced in 2024 was AB 465, SB 480, titled the Help Not Harm Act. And that would have prohibited any youth underneath of the ages of 18 from receiving gender affirming care. And then there was a secondary bill that was introduced as kind of a mini package that would have allowed for healthcare providers to be sued for providing gender affirming care. Nationally, there are states that have these bills that have made it a felony for doctors or medical care providers to provide gender affirming care. Wisconsin is not one of those states. In Wisconsin, you would just, and I put that in quotation marks, just have your medical license revoked by one of the Wisconsin licensing boards.
But we didn't let the bill come to law, so don't get too confusing for a second.
Yeah. The states that make it a felony to provide gender affirming care are Idaho, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Alabama, Florida, South Carolina. All those states make it a felony. Wisconsin does not. And I will also say that, again, due to incredible turnout on behalf of the community and on behalf of allies, directing thousands and thousands of calls, almost 5,000 calls during the 2023-2024 legislative session, and 15,000 pages of testimony, an even larger number, we were able to make sure that this bill was vetoed by Governor Tony Evers. So it never became law, and we don't have to worry about it. And Governor Evers has pledged to continue to veto any bills that take away access to gender affirming care for our youth.
Thank you, both to Tony Evers and to Sean. Keep going, Sean. So this is a great example of a time when the mobilization of specifically our friends at Equality Florida really made it possible for us to us as a community to adequately explain a bill in a way that essentially branded it from our side, as opposed to, as Sean just explained, the medical care ban was branded by the opponents of our community as a help not harm bill. Don't Say Gay is the way that the Equality Florida organization, which is the same as Fair Wisconsin, but in Florida, really attempted to describe what Ron DeSantis's bill in Florida that did eliminate the conversations and education about LGBTQ+ communities in Florida schools, what that impact really meant. And so you will see that Wisconsin has not passed this bill, but there has been quite a bit of movement, and I'll have Sean speak in a moment about like legislative side, but I want to speak for a moment about the school board level. Fair Wisconsin does a lot of work at the legislature, but we are also working more and more in partnership with GSAFE to do things on a school board level, and we've also always done quite a bit of work on a local municipal level. And in school boards, we see quite a bit of movement on trying to create policies against discussing, quote, controversial issues, and then defining controversial issues to include LGBTQ+ history and also even LGBTQ+ identity. And so this is an example of a time when if something doesn't, quote, succeed at one level of government, it often sort of infiltrates down into other levels to see what can or cannot work. Of course, FAIR also tries to mobilize at a local municipal level in other ways that are quite positive, right? And try it when we're not able to get something passed at the state level. But it's sort of a tactic that we see on all sides. And so these controversial issue policies that are being inserted into school boards right now are sort of mini don't say gay bills in school board policy form. Sean, could you speak a little bit about the Wisconsin world here?
Yeah. So Equality Florida and Florida received a bill that was a lot more sweeping than any bill that we've seen in Wisconsin. The bills that we've seen in Wisconsin have actually been fairly segmented out into more bite-sized chunks. So Don't Say Gay is a form of curriculum censorship and hostile school climate bills that just seek to make teaching and schools a less safe, less welcoming place. So in Wisconsin, actually, to start off nationally, 17% of LGBTQ youth live in states that completely censor the discussion of LGBTQ plus people or issues in school curricula. 13% of LGBTQ youth live in states that require parental notification before discussion of LGBTQ plus issues, which is something that we saw in Wisconsin. It's not law, but we saw an attempt for that. This 13% also allows for parents to opt their children out if the parents do not like that content. So in Wisconsin, we saw 4 different bill types. Assembly Bill 15, Senate Bill 10, which defines what is harmful and offensive material to be housed in public libraries or schools. And that is an incredibly vague term that would allow the legislature or individuals in the district to define what is offensive or harmful material. There is no legislative or legal definition of that. So it's really leaving that up to families and parents and teachers to define that. Often in many places, that'll result in the restriction of a lot of materials. We saw AB 304, SB 309, which prohibits the use of school or public funds to prohibit or distribute or purchase, again, in quotes, obscene material, another vague term that is used to give it control to the schools and the libraries and the local municipalities to determine what obscene is, with no definition. That is a very, very risky area and can allow for a lot of broad definitions when we're seeing in other states that LGBTQ plus issues are defined as obscene or harmful or whatever. That would also include the talking about US Senator Tammy Baldwin or Congressman Mark Pocan simply because they are LGBTQ. And then the biggest bill that we got related to Don't Say Gay and curriculum censorship is AB 510 SB 489, which is the Parents' Bill of Rights. This is a massive bill. It includes about 20 policies in it, but the ones that are specifically related to LGBTQ youth in schools it allows for parents to determine the name and pronouns that the child will use at school. And it also gives parents the right to opt students out of classes when quote unquote controversial subjects shall be taught. And those subjects can include gender identity, sexual orientation, and institutional racism, among a broad category of others. So again, these bills are often a tool to silence teachers, and they create a chilling effect in classrooms and the comfortability of teachers to talk about issues that students need to learn about or should see because it's helpful for students to see their own identity in the materials that they're using to learn with. I don't know, Abby, do you have anything else you want to add in?
You gave me the perfect alley-oop for one more thing about the very wide sweeping aspect to both the Parent Bill of Rights that you just mentioned and also just Don't Say Gay legislation in general. And that is that it is a very targeted playbook that people are using. That is a copy-paste playbook from the arguments about critical race theory and not the attempts to make it the attempts to ban the teaching of history in a very accurate way. I would say, as a former history teacher, that playbook is also being used now about LGBTQ+ identity, and the Bill of Rights that I don't even like using the phrase because I think that's a very misleading phrase for what it's called, but the bill that is the quote parental Bill of Rights really sort of combines both of those playbooks together in one in a way that would be incredibly problematic for any kind of teaching. And also I'll say it's again another example of something that, because it didn't pass through the legislature and get signed into law, thank goodness it did not, it's something that again people are trying at a more local level. Again, controversial issues policy with school boards. It is already having, even the discussion of it has a chilling effect. I have already received phone calls in this job now about teachers having very difficult conversations with administration and being told that they shouldn't wade into certain topics that they used to be able to teach about quite easily. And I also heard that in my previous job as well. So we are seeing chilling effects, even though these things are not getting passed into law in our state. Thank you, Sean. Keep going.
This is also a bill that, again, has come up in 2021, 2022, and 2023, 2024. Governor Evers has vetoed it both times, and he will be vetoing it again if it should come up in this session. And all of these bills that we've talked about, none of them have become law, but many of them have had to be blocked by Governor Evers. And if we did not have Governor Evers and his veto pen, many of these bills would have been in place. Because even though we've driven thousands of calls and thousands of emails and hundreds of people to the Capitol, I mean, our testimony waiting rooms had waiting rooms and they had waiting rooms. You know, and the legislators on a partisan line, on a party line, voted. The only time that happened was when Senator Joan Ballweg voted in committee against, she joined the two Dems who were on the committee to prevent the college athletes bill from moving forward because we already have a college policy in place.
Wow, yes, let's talk about something positive. Keep going, Sean. This was our title slide in between. So it would be really wonderful if we could really get some of these things done, and we are going to try our darndest. And I do think we are going to continue to lay the groundwork that makes these kinds of actions possible in the very near future. We have elected a more pro-equality legislature than we have ever had before, and we will keep working until we're able to get these through. But these are really the most important priorities of Fair Wisconsin. Number one is expanding our non-discrimination law to include gender identity and gender expression for housing, for public accommodations. It currently is not inclusive, and it absolutely needs to change. It is our number one legislative priority. When we do proactive work, we talk about it everywhere. We encourage you to also talk about it. We also want to talk about, for a moment, ending conversion therapy and ending the gay trans panic defense. In terms of ending conversion therapy, I'm going to actually turn it back over to Sean again, because we've had some success at the local, more municipal level with ending conversion therapy, and I would love to for you to speak for a moment about that more local work that Fair Wisconsin's done.
Yeah, Fair Wisconsin has been working for the past since after the marriage amendment campaign, but really heavily in earnest since about 2015, 2016 to make sure that we're instituting local conversion therapy bans and policies in place to prevent conversion therapy. We've been able to get 14 conversion therapy bans in at local levels, and we are working on a handful of other ones Unfortunately, there's a couple of them that are being litigated, and so many of our municipalities that were working on this are waiting for the litigation to be done. But we are confident that the bans will be found not in any violation and not violating religious freedoms, which is the ground that they're so often challenged on. These bans, they do not they prohibit licensed mental health providers and known individuals from providing it, but there is no way that we are able to prohibit religious institutions from providing or practicing conversion therapy. So many of these bills include a financial penalty. I don't believe any of them include a criminal penalty at this point. And we are currently working on, there's currently a lawsuit working its way through the state legislature or through the state Supreme Court. The bill is currently being heard, or the case is currently being heard as we speak, on making it a code of conduct violation for marriage and family therapists, professional counselors, and social workers to practice conversion therapy. So they would be able to have their license revoked and potentially face other professional disciplines if they were to practice conversion therapy. That was part of a larger rulemaking bill that has been bogged down in the legislature through the Joint Committee for the Review of Administrative Rules. And they've been blocking that for many years, and we've been working on it for about 7 years in total, and hopefully we'll have an answer to whether it's going to go into place soon. We're waiting on the court's decision.
Thanks, Sean. I have actually not been tracking the chat, but something just came up that I think really lends itself well to a quick side note here. Because we are not able to incorporate the bans on conversion therapy into including religious institutions, this is also a moment where it's really important to understand some of the other work that Fair Wisconsin does in terms of educating about these issues. Obviously, that's what we're doing with you right now, right? But we're doing it in a very specific sort of legislative context. I have personally witnessed Sean conduct town halls about why conversion therapy needs to end and how all of us need to understand its negative impact so that we can be influences in our own communities trying to get these bans at a municipal level, and also so that we can be influences in our own community circles, and so that people understand what kind of impact these really negative practices have on people. And so since we're not able to make any movement towards getting them banned in religious institutions, the public education about that impact, that's where the rubber hits the road on making any kind of change in that sphere. And so, I have seen Sean conduct that town hall because it was before I was even executive director of this organization. My wife is a social work professor and was on that town hall talking about the impacts and the need for what Sean just mentioned about the rulemaking to include that code of conduct violation. So it's just an example, again, of we do so much legislative work, but we also do a lot of public education work that is not specifically about bills, unlike what we are doing right now. Sean has also been leading a really impactful coalition to do some proactive work in the upcoming legislative session about HIV and AIDS policy. And I think it's really important that we understand some of it from a decriminalization standpoint and also from an access to care standpoint. So Sean, could you speak to those two sort of avenues that you're looking at for HIV legislation going forward?
Yeah, so this past year, Fair Wisconsin has dived for the first time really into HIV policy. This has been a growing area for the LGBTQ movement, not only to end the HIV and AIDS epidemic, but to work to destigmatize it and also decriminalize it. So in many states, you can be criminalized or have extra fines just for having HIV. And many folks who have HIV are already facing systematic barriers. Wisconsin is one of the states that does have an HIV criminalization law on the books, among a bunch of other STDs and STIs. And data has shown that criminalizing HIV has zero impact on having folks go get tested or reducing transmission rates. So we are currently, for the first time, having a coalition to study what decriminalizing HIV in the state of Wisconsin would look like. We are also beginning to work on expanding access for PrEP and PEP, which are two medications that folks can take that are about 99% effective to reduce transmission rates of HIV and some other STIs and STDs. And so we are looking at what it would take to make it more accessible at a local level, what healthcare and health insurance options are available, and how can we increase access for PEP and PrEP into rural communities, and how can we increase access for everyone? Because a lot of people think that PEP and PrEP should only be taken by gay men. Everybody who is able or is having sex should be taking PEP and PrEP. And so we are working on figuring out a way to expand access for those.
Thank you, Sean. Such important work. Okay, I know that the next slide is actually about ending conversion therapy, so you can just skip it and go to the very next slide with the lovely Tammy Baldwin and about codifying marriage. And I'll have you take that one too.
Yeah. So Fair Wisconsin was formed in the early aughts to make sure that Wisconsin had and fought against the constitutional amendment on same-sex marriage. The constitutional amendment prohibits same-sex marriage. And in Wisconsin, we still have that constitutional amendment and it has not been removed. So unless if Obergefell falls, same-sex marriage in Wisconsin would not necessarily be recognized. So U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin introduced the Respect for Marriage Act, and that bill requires that states recognize same-sex marriages regardless of where they happen. So if somebody were to get married in Iowa, their marriage would be required to be recognized in Wisconsin if Obergefell were to fall. And we know that that is a very, very, very real possibility because of what Justices Alito and Clarence Thomas have said, that they are interested in looking at the laws surrounding Obergefell and Loving, and whether or not those the right to privacy there still exists. So Tammy Baldwin led the fight for that, and she was successful in getting I believe it was a 62 vote majority in the U.S. Senate, which these days is very, 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 very rare, but I think it really speaks to the incredible work and the incredible effort that U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin helps put in.
And I'm going to take it back for a second to say two quick things. I just want to say that, like, on a personal level, I really, really appreciate this particular act, because actually when I was in a different relationship, I was married in Iowa, and Wisconsin did not recognize my marriage because of the constitutional marriage ban on the books here. And it actually prevented me from getting a divorce, which is a part of marriage equality that people do not realize. But that is also a right that is protected when marriage is protected. It's not as fun or celebratory a thing to talk about when it comes to marriage protections, but it is incredibly important. And so this recognition of marriage, no matter what state it happens in, is super important. It is not everything. I would say it is not enough, but it is definitely a huge step as well. The other thing I want to mention is that Fair Wisconsin has, because of what Sean just mentioned, about the potential, about the tenuousness, essentially, of marriage equality right now. We just started a new webpage on our site. It is not as robust as I want it to be, but we're working on it, of legal resources for people to understand in terms of if you are worried about the sort of strength of rights protecting your marriage, and you want to get some more paperwork ready, like wills or power of attorneys or whatever. There is some new guidance that I was able to assemble some resources from law firms in Wisconsin and put them as links on our website. It's not much, it's not pretty, it's not enough yet, but it is something, and I'm going to put it in the chat. so that people can access it. The first resource on that page is actually more specifically about identification documents for trans individuals and non-binary individuals. That is also incredibly important right now. And I highly recommend, if you know someone who's looking for any kind of guidance or resources and any of these legal sort of battles right now, please feel free to share this widely. We put this on the website because we have been getting inquiries for information through email or phone, and we thought it was most effective to try and put them all together in one place to make them easily shareable. Again, it's not enough. It's barely much right now, but we are working to try and beef this up, looking forward as we look into what's next for our community. Sean, next slide. I think we're almost to the end. Oh, Tammy, well done again. Yay. Take it away, Sean.
Yeah, so the Equality Act. This is unfortunately probably not going to see the light of day for a little while under the new Senate. But Tammy Baldwin again championed a incredible bill that would have expanded non-discrimination protections in public accommodations for LGBTQ plus folks. It would have been one of the largest, most sweeping protections for the LGBTQ community that we have ever seen at a federal level. It would have prevented discrimination in housing, in finances, in being able to get access to credit, adoption services, parents and families, in so many areas. And I always like to bring it up because it is still such an important bill, even if it's not going to be going anywhere. The fact that Tammy almost got it across the finish line. We needed the 60 vote threshold. We were only able to get up to 56 or 58 senators, but I still think that is incredible. And we also know that 73% of Americans support the Equality Act, including 68% of Republicans. So it has broad bipartisan support across the country. And so we're going to keep fighting every day until this act is able to become law and make sure that all Americans across the country are protected.
Thank you, Sean. We're going to put up the last slide that has our contact information, and I'm going to put a couple things in the chat, and then I know we do have some time for questions, which is wonderful. I did see a question earlier of how many people are on your staff. That's a lot of pages of testimony. Correct, it is, and we only have 3 people on staff and a lovely part-time accountant. So there's me as executive director, there's Sean, political and advocacy director, and there's Kate, our statewide community organizer, and we do it all. And so the reason I'm mentioning this is that we are always accepting more volunteers for help with such things. And we have some sessions coming up, so I'm putting the link to our upcoming volunteer sessions in the chat. One way to make sure that you always know what's happening at Fair Wisconsin is to sign up for a volunteer session and then just, getting all the information upcoming. You'll see also, in addition to the volunteer sessions, there are some processing sessions that I'm hosting to help us all sort of work through where we're at with the election results. They are all done through writing because I am a former creative writing teacher. And so that's what I bring to this moment. And I wanted to offer those as well in case people are interested. So that is right there in that link. Please explore. And I hope to see you at one of those sessions or volunteer or processing sessions. I will now turn it back over to whomever is going to moderate us with questions. And I think, Sean, you can probably stop sharing screen. You can just be people. Although I do love that picture of Governor Evers. It's lovely.
Yes, I will be the chat question moderator.
Wonderful.
Oh, now the chat went away. Okay. So again, remember to put your questions in the chat. And also, if you want to raise your hand and ask your own question, you are certainly welcome to do that as well. So Delaney Zimmer from our very own staff asks, RFK Jr. has been vocal about opposing puberty blockers for youth. Do you have any concerns he could implement a nationwide ban as secretary if he passes Senate appointment?
Great question. And we are going to go into that a little bit in terms of challenges when it comes to our panel. But I will say the Vice President-elect Vance actually was the author of a gender-affirming care ban for minors at the national level. It didn't go anywhere, but he's the Vice President-elect now. So I think we need to be clear-eyed about our understanding of what we might be up against. I don't know exactly what, frankly, to be honest, I don't know how far-reaching the HHS secretary's powers are. I will say I am terrified by what that might mean. And I think the panel later today is going to talk quite a bit about the impact of the positive impact gender-affirming care can have for people. And I think the flip of that is sort of inferred when we speak to that. So we'll see if we get any more information on that. But Sean, I didn't know if you wanted to add something there.
I don't have anything necessarily to add on whether the HHS secretary's powers allow for that. I will say, I think we should all be concerned that we're talking about eliminating childhood vaccines. I think that is a pretty terrifying place that we're talking about that. So just wanna put that out there, and it's also not a joke. That these are actual conversations that our government is having, and I think that's terrifying.
All right, Louise Robbins asks, is anyone taking up the cause of the newly elected trans legislator in DC? The Congress is considering forbidding her to use a restroom that corresponds to her gender identity.
First, plug for Sarah McBride. That's Sarah McBride from Delaware. Truly an incredible human, long before she was elected to the legislature, and author of a really amazing memoir. So if anybody wants to dig into the intersection of policy and identity and also have a really good cry, I highly recommend Sarah McBride's memoir. I know that is not the question, but I do think it is really important because it tells a pretty compelling story in terms of how someone's personal lived experience influences what kind of policy they want to fight for, and it might not be what you expect. And so highly recommend. I do know Fair Wisconsin is a part of the Equality Federation. It's sort of a loose consortium of all the other state equality groups in the country, and some states have too. So it's quite a few members, and there was a bit of chat today on our group chat about supporting incoming Representative McBride. I do not know where they are at the precise moment in the process there, honestly. Sorry, I've been a little busy today, but I do know that there are quite a few groups that are stepping up to try and support her. So she's not alone in this fight. There are organizations across the country that are national also, in addition to the Equality Federation. She's got support, but frankly, unfortunately, we don't have much of a vote in Congress. So I think it is entirely possible that is going to happen, especially because of the way procedural rules are done in Congress, and that makes me really disappointed, but also I think proves the point of why Sarah McBride needs to be in Congress.
Thank you. Patrick Robbins says, would there be a way to ban religions from using certain terminology that makes religion-based conversion therapy sound more legitimate? For instance, could they be prohibited from using the word therapy or forced to issue a disclaimer that their programs aren't approved of by professional associations of psychologists, psychiatrists, pediatrician, etc.?
Thank you so much for the question. And I think Sean, I'm sure, has things to say, but I'll reiterate what I said about the public education here being so important, because I think the answer is no, because of freedom of religion and free speech. And so for that reason, all the more important that we make sure that the community at large understands that this is not therapy, because we can't necessarily compel the religious institutions to change their language. And so it's really up to us to make sure that we're educating people to understand what they mean by that language. John, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, a lot of attempts of conversion therapy are not explicitly titled therapy. It is, let's go talk to your pastor, or let's, there's so many different ways that conversion therapy happens. And while therapy is a name, there's a million different ways that folks can receive it or be victims of conversion therapy. It can be, Sunday school sessions. It can be one-on-one sessions with pastors. We've heard horrific stories from survivors of conversion therapy all across Wisconsin. And so that's where it gets really, really, really tricky to ban and get into religious institutions and try to tackle it from there, because again, changing language and censoring the way that churches or what they're allowed to say or what they're not allowed to say is a very legally fraught process. It really depends on the courts. It really depends on the lawyers that are involved. And then again, a lot of the attempts of conversion therapy are masked as something else. And so it's very hard. It's also additionally hard because a lot of folks don't report that it is happening when it is. And so we need to make sure that we're increasing education around it. And one of the best ways that we can is if we know of a church that is practicing conversion therapy, we can let the public know, and we can try to move families away from that into a more supporting, open and affirming congregation if they would like to still do that.
Thanks for that, John.
All right, from Kay Vance, she says, as a parent and professional, I've seen how much gender fluid children suffer just by being themselves. The recent ads have only exacerbated the hurt. Can we develop a proactive strategy to limit these ads in upcoming elections, for example, the Wisconsin Supreme Court?
Thank you for bringing up the political attack ads. As Sean mentioned, I think it is striking how much money was spent and how visible they were and how incredibly ineffective they were at turning out votes. But what they were very effective at is making people feel horrible about themselves and making a community, the rest of the general public, potentially more primed to receive misinformation. And that is a huge problem. And that is why I think it's really, really, really important that we keep having these more personalized conversations with people in our lives to break through those kinds of political attack ads. It's why Fair Wisconsin tried to our best to weigh in. I co-wrote an editorial with a dear friend of mine who is trans that appeared in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel about how we need to remember that we are talking about people, and people are not issues, and children are not weapons, and we absolutely need to be centering the humanity of the people that we are asking to vote for other people to represent us. And it was fascinating to me, the response that we got from the editor when we submitted it, because the response was, no one has asked us to print anything about this topic, but it was everywhere. And I think it's also an indication of the fact that it is a very, it can be a dangerous thing for people to speak up about, because then you also become a target. And so I don't think we have a Supreme Court strategy there. But I do know that there are a lot of people and a lot of organizations across this country working very hard to figure out how do we speak about trans people as people and not let anyone turn us as a community, and specifically the trans family members in our community, into issues against our will. And I know we are working right now with the Equality Federation, the group I was just talking about, on a trans narrative project to try and make sure we're understanding what is most effective when we speak about the trans experience in a way that centers humanity and also brings people along on their own journeys of understanding. And that is something that we are very, very attuned to working on. I also know there are some organizations that are currently proactively figuring out what kind of ads could we use to defang the attacks. What kind of ads could a more progressive voice use to, I don't want to say counter, because that sort of puts them on equal footing, but eliminate the vitriol. Sort of take the energy out of the other attack sides, the other side's attacks. I know those are in the works. I know I have not seen them yet, but I know that those are projects that are currently underway, and I'm really, really grateful to the organizations that are taking the lead on that. It was a really ugly time, and it started in 2022 in some other states. We saw a little bit, but like it started really hard in some other states, and it specifically started. Part of it was a brainchild of Stephen Miller, who we all know was just appointed to a pretty high position in the White House. So it's not going anywhere, and it's up to us to try and figure out how to make sure that we're centering and holding the humanity of the people who are being attacked.
I will also say, restricting what content is allowed in ads is very, 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 very tricky. And we have not had luck at any court levels in restricting it due to the idea of quote unquote freedom of speech and freedom of expression and freedom of press in the First Amendment, and the fact that campaign finance contributions and campaign spending is seen as freedom of speech. And so we haven't seen a lot of luck at state levels or at national levels in combating or preventing these ads from airing, unless there is like directly like libel towards a specific individual. Other than that, it's pretty tricky to do. And I saw a comment about whether or not folks have spoken to the Harris Walls campaign. And I know that there have been letters sent to the Harris campaign from independent groups, and I have friends who were volunteering and were working on the Out for Harris side of the wall. And there was a lot of conversations. I'm not privy to what those conversations were, but I know that there was a substantial amount of frustration that was expressed by leaders, LGBTQ leaders, trans folks from across the country, and who were very involved in the campaign. I don't know what those conversations were or what that took place, but I do know that the campaign did receive letters from external groups similar to Fair Wisconsin, HRC, and then as well as like internal conversations about it. I just don't know what those were at this point.
Thanks, Sean. I know we're about to move to the panel. Is that okay if I get that started? So
Yes.
I'll say, I want to take about 30 more seconds. And as I do that, it's also my cue to my panelists to come on video. And I know I need to turn it over to Cole for intros. What I will say real quickly is I saw in the question in the chat, and I think it's such an important question, advice about how to talk to children about Trump's election in terms of how they will be impacted. And so speaking as a very recent 8th grade teacher who was teaching in 2016, I will say that it is a very difficult question. And of course it is a personalized answer. But when I think back to those conversations that I had, and also the conversations I'm having now, which are different, but obviously sort of rhyme, one of the things that I always go back to is that we've got this because we've got us, and this country was always ours and is not going to go, and we are not going anywhere. And that is incredibly hard. And it is a little bit, there's so much energy you have to put into that. But to me, I think that's something that has really been getting me through in conversations with people in my life and children in my life. And I also just want to add that if you want to be a part of some processing about that, check out that events link that I put out there. We are holding some of those processing events, and you might be able to, I don't think they would necessarily be interesting to kids, but you might find them interesting to bring back to your children. And with that, I will turn it back over to Cole for a moment.
I am going to stop recording. I want to make that really loud and clear that the rest of this session is not going to be recorded.